video, we're going to discuss how to start bar prep off right. So before we dive into how you can do this, I want to first remind you that bar prep in your journey to actually taking the bar exam is a marathon, not a sprint. And my guess is someone has told you that before, maybe a few people at this point. But I really want to stress the importance of understanding what that means. Bar prep and what you put into it is going to directly correlate with your end result. Bar prep is all about hard work, and there's not a ton of time. So making sure you start off on the right foot is incredibly important. In this video, I'm going to talk about 6 tips to help you do just that. So our first tip is we want to help you get in the right mindset to take the bar exam. So make sure you're taking time to do this. So what does this really mean? Well, here are some basic tips to help you get in that right frame of mind so that you can hit the ground running. The first thing to keep in mind to do so is to start small. Remember, you don't have to become a master at contracts or real property in the first day. Break it into chunks and tackle it, one small chunk at a time. 2, we're going to talk about scheduling. Make sure that when you create a schedule, stick to it. Put it in your calendar and treat it accordingly. Another tip to help you get in the right mindset is to find a study partner, or if that doesn't work well for you, maybe consider engaging a tutor to help you out along the way. Another tip is change where and or how you study. Take a long time to think about where you are most productive. Some people need a change of scenery every few days or every other day. Keep that in mind when you create a schedule. Some people work at home, but then they get super distracted. Other people do just fine. So you want to make sure that you're considering those circumstances. And then lastly, our final tip to help you get in that right mindset to start bar prep off on the right foot is give yourself some rewards periodically. Maybe it's watching your favorite show or going to a movie or having dinner with a friend. But set goals and give yourself little rewards along the way to keep yourself motivated. So that's our first tip to starting bar prep off on the right foot, getting in that right mindset. Our second tip is creating a study schedule. I told you we would talk about this in a little bit of greater detail. Here we are. So first, let's talk about your study schedule generally, and then let's talk briefly about what your daily study schedule might look like. So getting to the general part first. The very first thing to do if you're creating a study schedule is you want to look at the big picture. Figure out when the bar exam is and then where you're at. Count up the amount of days you have. But consider other things going on in between, like days you know you can't study. Maybe you have a wedding, for instance. Maybe it's a birthday. Consider things like how many days you want off prior to the bar exam. And when I say off, I mean, of course, you're studying and preparing, but maybe you want 5 days or 10 days or a week before the bar exam where you're done listening to lectures. So keep that in mind. Once you've figured out how many actual days you have to study, you should divide it up. Ideally, you would give yourself as many days as possible for each MBE subject. And most people start their reviews with the MBE subjects because they're so valuable on the bar exam between the essay portion and the MBE portion. So they'll divide up their time equally amongst those MBE subjects. And then once their review of those MBE subjects is over, they'll then segue into their review of the essay-only subjects, giving themselves a little bit less time for those because usually they're not as dense. And again, they're only coming or applicable to one part of their bar exam rather than 2. Finally, in terms of your general study schedule, set aside time each week to make sure that you can review the old material. When it comes to your daily study schedule, there are a few things you want to make sure that you're including on your daily checklist. The first are lectures. So maybe you're going to a live lecture, maybe you're streaming it live, maybe you are doing it on demand, but nonetheless, this is likely a component of your everyday studying. Now, if you are a repeat taker, maybe you are not listening to every single bar exam lecture over again. That is something that you'll have to decide and figure out if that's productive for you. Something else to have on your daily schedule is memorization. And we'll talk about the importance of memorization in just a second, but we want to make sure you are carving out enough time to start memorizing right from day one, rather than saving memorization for the end of bar prep when there's just not enough time. Make sure you're factoring in time to practice both essays, MBEs, and MPTs. Make sure you're factoring in exercise. Oftentimes people forego exercise in an effort to have more time to study, but in reality, exercising is so important to your bar prep schedule generally because it's so important for your brain. Lastly, make sure you're carving out time for regular breaks. So getting enough sleep, eating regular meals, or even just quick breaks to take your mind off the material for a moment. Moving on to our third tip to help you start bar prep outright is memorization and stressing the importance of memorization. So I told you we would get here, and here we are. Although practice is absolutely necessary for you to do well on the bar exam, memorization is also very, very important. It's really hard to practice law that you have not yet memorized. But of course, practice is important to show you what you need to memorize and how you understand it. So I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that practice isn't important. Of course it is. But do not underestimate the importance of memorization. When we talk to repeat takers, before I learn much about each person individually, I can usually guess that they failed the bar exam because they did not have enough time to memorize, or they didn't spend enough time memorizing. Remember, this is a closed book exam. You need to know the law cold, and you need to know the nuances. The MBE doesn't test the broad strokes of the law. You need to know the exceptions and the exceptions to those exceptions. Now, oftentimes people ask us, how much time should I spend memorizing? And the unfortunate reality is there is no hard and fast rule that I can give you. But a general thing to keep in mind is that most people find themselves successful if they spend about a third of their time on lectures, a third of their time on memorization, and a third of their time on practice. Once your lectures are over, you can then share your time between memorization and practice, usually evenly, or spend a little bit more time on one over the other. Remember that memorization doesn't happen overnight. That is a huge mistake we see people make with memorization. They don't want to put in the time. We always joke around that memorization is the heavy lifting of bar prep. It is a ton of work and it is very time consuming. So stick with it. It doesn't just happen without hard work. The fourth tip to starting bar prep off on the right foot is make sure that when you practice multiple choice questions, you are practicing efficiently. So this really means two things. There are two important things I want to have on your radar. First is how you practice when you get to that point, and two, what you should focus on. So let's first talk about how you should practice. In our opinion, we think you should start slow. We find a lot of value in a slow and methodical approach. That doesn't mean that you should never do timed questions. Of course you should, because your bar exam is timed. But while you're learning the law and seeing if you have it memorized and seeing if you understand how to apply it, there's so much value in doing one question at a time, rather than going through the motions and doing a whole bunch of questions at once. That loses a lot of value. So when you do one question at a time, we think that you should be dissecting the question. Ask yourself, what subject is this testing? What is the precise legal issue? Do I know the rule? Trying to apply the rule, and then reaching a conclusion all on your own. Then when you're done, which of course that's going to take time, grade yourself. And if you get a question wrong, write down why. So if you didn't know the rule, go look up the rule in your outline and write it down. Maybe you read the fact pattern too fast and you skipped a very important fact. Write yourself a note to slow down. The whole purpose of dissecting these questions and then making sure you understand what you're doing right and wrong is going to help you improve more quickly than just doing a whole bunch of questions in a row and hoping that you see some sort of improvement. Now, the second thing to keep in mind with having an efficient MBE approach is making sure you're focused on the highly tested areas of law. So while the 7 MBE subjects are tested equally, the topics within each subject are not. The one exception being real property, which is very challenging for most people. But for instance, when it comes to constitutional law, individual rights is the most highly tested topic within that subject. subject. So if you're really trying to maximize your chances of success, we want to make sure that you're focusing on those highly tested areas because they're simply worth more on your bar exam. Our next tip for starting bar prep out on the right foot is also practicing essays and MPTs or PTs efficiently. So you have to keep in mind a few things to do this. The first, as it relates to writing a bar exam essay, is making sure you understand the correct format. In our opinion, the best format is one that helps the grader read your answer quickly and score you and give you as many points as possible. This means if you're making the grader's job easier, you're likely to have a more high scoring essay. So usually this means you should be following the IRAC format, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion format. You don't need a fancy issue statement. It could be a heading that you bold and underline, and then you follow it with the applicable rule, you analyze it, and you reach a conclusion. And you should do this for each issue that you're tackling in response to an essay question. Something else to keep in mind to have this efficient approach is make sure you take time to self-grade your essays. This means you're not just writing an essay and then reading the model answer and making some mental notes about what went right or what went wrong. Take it a step beyond that. Take your essay that you wrote and correct it. So for instance, if you got the rule wrong, fix it. If you missed an element, add it in. Change your color font so that you can see those additions that you made. Maybe your analysis is not spot on because you missed a fact that they spent a lot of time analyzing in the model answer. Add in that information in a different color font so you can see it. Check your conclusion. If you're wrong, fix it. This way, when you go back to review those essays, you can see what you did well and what you need to improve on. And also taking that time to really grade yourself is going to help you remember so that the next time those issues are tested, you know exactly how to approach it. Another way to help you approach the essays and MPTs or PTs efficiently is to make sure you focus on those highly tested topics. There are certain topics within each subject that are just simply tested more frequently than others. Being aware of these and having these areas of law memorized are going to make your chances of success that much greater on the upcoming bar exam. You can't know everything. The good news is you don't have to. If you know those highly tested areas, you're likely to do very well. My sixth and final tip to help you start bar prep off on the right foot are some time management tips. So as I mentioned, for instance, as it relates to the MBE, slow methodical practice is really, really important. But also doing timed practice is key because ultimately your bar exam is going to be timed. So when it comes from a time management perspective, we recommend that you practice released real MBE questions. This way you get a feel for how they ask questions in the true format, as well as the difficulty level, so that there are no surprises on bar exam day. We also recommend from a timing perspective that you start small and you increase your timed practice along the way. So start this at the beginning of bar prep and then keep building on it. So don't jump in and try to do a 100 question timed exam. Start small. Do 30 minutes or an hour. Do that a few times, then do 2 hours or an hour and a half even first, and keep building on it from there. When it comes to some time management tips for essays, we recommend that, of course, you start practicing time tests earlier on, just like I mentioned for MBE questions and exams. So again, don't just jump in and try to do an essay exam timed. Start small and build on it slowly. Taking time tests is kind of like muscle memory. So you need to keep that area exercised frequently. By learning those highly tested areas of law, it's going to help you improve timing on both the MBE and essay portion of your exam, because it's more likely than not that those highly tested issues will appear on your exam. Additionally, as it relates to a time management tip for essays, we recommend that you often start with the call to question before reading the facts. This can help you really zero in about what is going on in your question. Finally, as it relates to performance tests, we know that most people struggle with timing here, and honestly, practice is going to help you so much. So make sure that you start practicing PTs early on. Make sure you memorize general formatting and that you practice with real released PTs. Try different approaches to the PT if you struggle with timing, and go with whatever approach works best for you. We hope that you found these tips helpful so that you can start bar prep off on the right foot.